Hey, it's Russell here from Adelaide West Physio and Pilates, and I wanted to introduce this article that I've read recently uh, that I thought was really, really interesting. If you're a parent of a young cricketer, a fast bowler, then this is really important, and particularly for people that have cricketers that are under the age of 22. So this seems to be 22, 23 seems to be a really important number when you're talking about this problem, which is bone stress injuries. Bone stress injuries are injuries that are typically associated with fast bowlers, where, if you know, back in the 70s, Dennis Lillee had had a spondylolisthesis that was related to his bowling technique, and it was from a technique error they put it down to, but likely to have a lot to do with the volume of bowling that he was doing too. And it's a really common problem in young cricketers. This is completely coincidental that I've got a mo going on like Dennis Lillee or Rod Marsh. It's just because it's getting towards the end of Movember if you're watching this some other time. Anyway, getting back to bone stress injuries. So this article was published in earlier this year, 2021. The main author was Kevin Sims, who's the physio for Cricket Australia. And what they wanted to do is investigate the different factors that could be involved in development of bone stress injuries in adolescent fast bowlers. And what they did was they took a reasonable sample. It was 222 fast bowlers, 220, yep, high level youth male cricket fast bowlers. So this is male, so there may be some differences with female fast bowlers, but I think making an assumption, but you can probably extrapolate these same risk factors, although hopefully at some point there might be a study repeated that is of female fast bowlers too. But they took 222 young fast bowlers with a mean age of 17.4 and looked at the ones that had sustained a lumbar stress injury out of that population. There were 49 out of that 222 that sustained a bone stress injury in that time. And they looked at the different variables that were involved in these athletes ending up with bone stress injury. And what they found, so before reading this, I would have thought, I reckon technique could probably be a big player in developing a bone stress injury. I probably would have thought that the volume of bowling was a big determinant of bone stress injury. They probably would have been the main two that I would have thought of. And what this study showed, which was really interesting, was that the risk of injury was pretty much 2.99 times higher for every year younger under the age of 22. So the risk of getting a bone stress injury in a 15-year-old was 3 times that of developing one in a 16-year-old, which was 3 times higher in a 16-year-old than a 17-year-old, and so on. So the age of the fast bowler is really, really important, it seems. The other factors that they identified were height, so the taller the bowler, and I wonder if that has to do with the fact that the loads that a taller bowler will develop in the lumbar spine are higher by virtue of the fact they're operating with a longer lever. And the other factor that was involved was the speed, so the higher the speed of the bowler as well. So when you combine them, what it means is that the younger, taller and faster the fast bowlers are at an increased risk of developing a bone stress injury. Now, these didn't account for all of the risk. It accounted for some of it. So there are other factors that weren't even studied in in this study that are going to be important too, that are yet to be revealed. But it's the biggest of the studies like this that have been done, and previously they've purely concentrated on things like bowling load and technique, which is probably why I was thinking that they were the most relevant. And interestingly, those two didn't come out as really big factors in this study, which is interesting in itself. One thing that they didn't look at, which they think is important too, is rate of growth. So apparently there are soccer studies where they've looked at rate of growth and how it relates to prevalence of injury, but they didn't look at it in this. But the suspicion is that if a bowler is going through a rapid increase in height, that's likely to just add into the mix even further. And the reason for that is that bones grow long before they grow strong. So for example, the lumbar vertebra might be getting taller, and in that time it has a relative reduction in bone mineral density, which it then catches up with. So there's a period of time where there's relatively less bone mineral density, which is going to put a bone at an increased risk of a stress injury. So the recommendation from all of that was to consider those factors, so the higher, and recognizing that those particular bowlers are more at risk, the faster, taller, younger bowlers, and to be monitoring their loads as a result. Even though it wasn't a big factor, it's definitely one of the things that's going to come into a bone stress injury, and optimizing technique as well. But particularly if a player is going through a growth spurt, it's well worth looking at their volume of bowling in that time and considering tapering it somehow. And the difficulty that I've found is that a lot of players in, so my son's involved in an under 16s competition, under 15s and under 16s. So they're all at the prime age, they're that little bit younger, growing, they're at a stage of growth where a lot of them are shooting up. And they're often involved in a few different competitions. So they might be involved in a Saturday morning competition for school, and then Saturday afternoon competition for their district club, and then Sunday afternoon competition for not community cricket, for the ATCA, that's a local turf cricket association here in South Australia. And so what that means is that there's 3 competitions there. Each of them might have a limit of 10 overs that they bowl on the day in each competition. And then on top of that, you've got their training commitments as well, whatever they might be. And each of the competitions, each of the teams like to get their full value from each of the player. And the other thing that's worth considering too is that there's a certain amount of self-selection, if you like. So the faster bowlers are often the ones that are most desirable as a member of a team. They tend to play at a high level. They tend to do more of it. And so in that way, they're kind of selecting themselves for more teams, more training, more games, and more load as a result. So there's a few interesting little things to play there, and one of the solutions that I can see, and talking about it with another physio earlier today that's involved in treating a lot of adolescent sports people, is a training diary. I think then there may need to be some kind of movement in cricket to have a training diary where kids are recording the number of balls that they deliver in a training session and the relative intensity of that training session and what kind of things the coaches had them working on, so that there's a bit of continuity between the different competitions, and so that potentially a kid can rock up to the next training session and say, hey, I did a training session yesterday, or I did a training session 2 days ago, and I bowled X number of bowls, and it was 8 out of 10 intensity, and to help that continuity for the player, as opposed to just rocking up and saying, I'm a bit tired today, I did a lot of bowling, so I'm a bit tired, I feel a bit sore. And that way it's going to be a little bit easier for load to be monitored. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on that if you're involved in cricket, and it probably counts true for all kinds of sports really. Most kids that are involved in sport aren't involved in just one team. There might be a club team, a school team, something else team, and so it gets very tricky when they have to navigate their way through a number of competitions, meaning a number of different matches and a number of different training sessions through the week. And that's if they're only involved in one sport. So in summary, I thought it was a really interesting article. It seemed to be very well done. The authors are really renowned authors like Alex Contouris and John Orchard, and they've obviously gone to a lot of trouble to set up something like this and to come up with those findings, which I think shift the focus towards some factors that perhaps hadn't been considered as much before, like the younger age, the taller kids, the speed of their bowling, as well as the things that had already been considered, like technique, how far they counter rotate and fall into lateral flexion, and also the volume of bowling that they do. Any questions about any of that? Any comments? Please put them in the chat in the comments below. I'm thinking what I might do is follow this up with something about the Cricket Australia guidelines about bowling volumes, because I think that's a really worthwhile conversation as well, and perhaps how we can go about implementing that with our young cricketers. Cheers.